Ladies and gentlemen, peace. I am your host, Gandhi, the Zoe, for the Principles of a Prophets podcast. And today we're back. We missed 1 week. Unfortunately, I was sick, had the stomach flu, but we're back, thank God. And today we're going to get right into it. We're getting into a new subject, and it's on the notion or the idea or figure of SaTaN. And to do so, how we're going to proceed, because this is it's an extensive subject, right? An idea. So we're going to take it by episodes. We're going to break down maybe into 3 or maybe even 4 episodes. Firstly, today we're going to do an introduction. We're delving into the context of the Bible, because the idea of SaTaN that either one of you who is listening right now or watching this episode have or may have, the source of this idea emerges from within the pages of the Hebrew Bible, what is generally in our societies referred to as the Old Testament. Although there have been some some reshaping, right, of what the original idea of SaTaN meant in the Bible. So we're going to see this. Throughout this series on the idea of SaTaN. But again, today we're going to discuss the roots. We'll delve into some biblical texts. You need not necessarily be religious. You will have the references above the comment section for you to verify also in your Bibles if you have any, or if you don't, you can simply Google the text, the references that I'm going to give. There will also be obviously some scholarly references, because they are scholars who have done vast research on this subject, which I'm going to discuss today. Apart from myself, I'm not an expert in this, but I've written actually a thesis for an undergrad at the University of Concordia on this subject. So I thought, you know what, we should talk about this, because often in our culture, whether you're from church or not, right, we have this idea that the evil and the bad that we experience or live or notice in the world has its source from this malevolent entity, right? This notion or idea of this principle of evil personified, and how it is often categorized as with the word SaTaN in our cultures, right? You hear it in churches and mosques and possibly in different form, even in different synagogues, right, in Jewish communities. So this idea it permeates our societies, right, in some shape or form. So I thought, since part of my intention is for this podcast is to delve into the sources, right, of some of the greater ideas that are part of the Western worldview. That's why today I was like, yeah, you know what, we should discuss this notion of SaTaN, because it's one or part of some of the great ideas from our culture. So we're going to do this right away. Now, by way of introduction, right, I went on the website to the Satanic Temple's FAQ page, and there's an answer to a question that they pose on the FAQ page that is relevant to what we're discussing today. I'm going to give you a couple of views, all right, or understandings of the notion of SaTaN. So we start with this answer from the Satanic Temple's website, the FAQ page. The question they pose on the FAQ page is, what does SaTaN mean to the Satanic Temple? And here's the answer. It reads as such: SaTaN is symbolic of the eternal rebel in opposition to arbitrary authority, forever defending personal sovereignty, even in the face of insurmountable odds. SaTaN is an icon for the unbowed will of the unsilenced inquirer, the heretic who questions sacred laws and rejects all tyrannical impositions. Ours is the literary SaTaN, best exemplified by Milton and the romantic Satanists from Blake to Shelley to Anatole, France. This is the answer that the Satanic Temple gives on its FAQ page to the question that they pose: what does SaTaN mean to the Satanic Temple? And if I don't know if you have Netflix, or there's a Fox series entitled Lucifer, right? Which I enjoyed, quite frankly, right? It's very entertaining. And the basis of that show or series, it is the main character is called Lucifer Morningstar. Now, this gentleman is basically he's a party goer. He's living life to the fullest. Has money, spends his money, but he has, well, at least in the beginning, right, or the first, if you want to say, seasons, he has a secret. Well, a secret that most people whom he has a who he's acquainted to do not know. And the secret is that Lucifer Morningstar is actually the devil. He was a superintendent in hell, and he left his position due to some frustration. I'm not going to mess it up for you if you didn't see it, but suffice it to say that he left his position in hell, and he takes on human form in Los Angeles, the city of angels. And with the money that he possesses, he has a club that he runs, and he also serves as some kind of consultant, right, to the police department of Los Angeles, the city of angels. He helps them solve cases and crimes, but he's also a vigilante, right, who punishes evildoers, right, in Los Angeles, California. And his name is Lucifer Morningstar. This character also is obviously it stems from this idea or notion of Satan. And the mention of the word Satan, as a matter of fact, there are a series of pictures that may be conjured in any of your minds who is watching or listening to this podcast at this moment. You may think of, again, this fallen angel who rules again hell and secretly torments and seeks to destroy humans and humanity. And he has legions of demons, right? And wicked spirits and ghosts whom, or that have, great power and are able to somewhat possess humans, right? And drive them to insanity and make them ill and persecute them in different types of ways. Excuse me. This is some of the imagery that is probably conjured when you hear the word Satan. So what we're going to do in this series, we're going to debunk some of these imageries. In fact, not to say that I'm not going to deny, right, the possibility or probability of some of the experiences, right, relating to some of these ideas or imageries that you may have in your mind when you hear the word Satan. However, part of what I seek to do, as I mentioned in the introduction to this episode, is to demystify or delve a little deeper into some of the greater ideas that informs the Western worldview. And this notion of Satan as the principle of evil is one such idea. But what we think, what we've inherited through tradition and what we've shaped out of the idea of Satan that we've inherited from tradition is not quite correct or accurate. Why? Because this idea, Satan, actually has a source and an origin. It originates from some pages of some texts in the Bible, notably the Hebrew Bible, what we generally call or is categorized as the so-called Old Testament. And in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, it's not quite how we understand it. So today's episode, right, this will probably be a part one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the roots of this idea, the word itself, the Hebrew word SaTaN, what it means, right, etymologically. And then we're going to see some text. Obviously, you're going to have reference to these texts above the comments section of the YouTube version of this podcast. And you'll also have references to some scholars whom I may mention, right, who have actually done research on this idea. So moving along, excuse me, I'm going to describe briefly, I had to take notes, the Hebrew word SaTaN, right? So, because in order to rightly proceed with the investigation, we must understand what the word means, right? Because in fact, the word, it's a word, SaTaN, right? But again, as I mentioned, it has its roots from the Hebrew SaTaN. And Hebrew language, as you might have noticed if you watched the previous episode on the idea or notion of Muhammadim, which I discussed, in Hebrew language, modern or classical, words consist of root letters, mainly 3 consonants, right? And all types of words, or various kinds of words, be it nouns, adjectives, or verbs, are formed by modifying this triconsonant root, those 3-letter root words, right? And modifications can be made by changing the vowels or adding consonants before the word, so prefixes, or after the word, i.e. suffixes, or inside the word, infixes, right? What we call infixes, right? In grammar. Now, the word SaTaN also consists of 3 Hebrew root letters. They are the Hebrew letter Sin, which is one of the S letters, and the Hebrew letter Tet, which is one of the T letters in Hebrew, and finally the consonant for in Hebrew, which is a Nun. These 3 letters or consonant is what forms the word Satan or SaTaN in Hebrew. Vowels are added, right, to these 3 letters so that we can have the phonetic sound SaTaN. Now, what is the etymology or origin of the word Satan or SaTaN? There are various words thought to be related to the noun Satan in Hebrew and its cognate languages. As I explained the previous episode, cognate languages are languages that have similarities or that are akin to a language. So say, for example, English is a cognate language to Latin, to French, to Spanish, right? In fact, these 3 languages are Latinized or Latin languages. So Spanish is a cognate language to English. So similarly, in Hebrew, there are cognate languages, and one of these, a few of these are Akkadian. I mentioned that again. Aramaic, Syriac, and Arabic are cognate languages to the Hebrew language. And these languages, they are words that also are used to express this notion of Satan, which some scholars think have affinity to the Hebrew word SaTaN. Now, there's a scholar called Peggy Day. She's a Canadian, and has identified 5 verbal roots from these related languages, Akkadian, Aramaic, Syriac, and Arabic, under which the ancient and modern etymologists have attempted to classify the noun SaTaN. These 5 verbal roots are, as I said, there's the Arabic, Satat. I might mispronounce this because I don't speak Arabic, but it's 3 consonant, S-T-T. And what it means is to stray. And there's Aramaic and Hebrew and Mandaean Sawat, which means to revolt or fall away. So the Sawat is a word also that is spelled with 3 consonants, S-W-T. The Syriac Sawat, so Syriac as another cognate language to Hebrew, also has a 3-consonant root word, Sawat, which means burn. And there's an Ethiopic word, S-T-Y, Sati. Again, excuse or pardon my pronunciations. The Ethiopic Sati, which means to seduce. And there's Akkadian Satu, which also means to stray. Cognate words increase the possibility of determining the meaning of obscure words from ancient languages, as I mentioned earlier, which may not be in use today. And the quest for understanding the biblical Hebrew word SaTaN, etymologists have painstakingly labored to identify the nature of this word. They sought to clarify whether the nun, so the last consonant that pronounces in English as N, and SaTaN or SaTaN, they sought to classify whether that nun was a root consonant in the original word SaTaN, right? Or whether the an, the sound an, right, the N, in SaTaN or SaTaN was a suffix attached to a base. The manner in which the word is defined depends on the result of this inquest or this inquiry by these etymologists. The findings from several studies on the aforementioned question has led Dr. Peggy to conclude that there is no sufficient reason to propose that SaTaN is composed of a base plus a suffix an. So remember I mentioned 3 consonants, right? STN in Hebrew, sin, tet, and nun. And the etymologists, what they're trying to figure is, the suffix an or nun, okay, and SaTaN, in their research anyway, well, based on their research, I should say, Dr. Peggy has determined that there is no sufficient reason based on the research that's been done by these etymologists to propose that SaTaN is composed, or SaTaN is composed of a base plus an suffix. As such, she also concludes that the letter nun in SaTaN must be a root consonant. So it wasn't added later on. Like the word originally it was constructed as such, with sin, tet, nun, according to Dr. Day. Now, furthermore, she affirms that the noun SaTaN has no strict derivation or relationship to any of the 5 prospective cognate verbal roots that we just mentioned earlier, right? From the Ethiopic, Aramaic, the Arabic, Akkadian, etc., right? And despite the fact that they semantically carry meanings that are strikingly appropriate to the character and function of SaTaN, even though, yes, as we've read earlier, right, some of these cognate words, they have, semantic affinity to how SaTaN, the word SaTaN, has come to be understood. Dr. Day and her research is saying that she doesn't think that the Hebrew word SaTaN necessarily have any affinity or relationship to these cognate words, right, in these 5 different languages. Now, she believes that these similarities spring forth from an interaction between folk etymological speculation and developing tradition. So in time, somehow, right, she thinks that these the affinity that we may find, right, between the Hebrew SaTaN and the Ethiopic, Sati, and the other languages, right, the other cognate languages, he thinks it's through interaction, right, between folk etymological speculations and developing traditions. So traditions, it's like a hybridization, like they borrow from each other. Excuse me. There exists but one cognate for the Hebrew SaTaN, which Dr. Day can attest for, and that is the Arabic SaTana, which means to block the way. Nevertheless, she does not think that the primitive meaning of SaTaN can be inferred from this Arabic cognate, since it is unattested for during the period under consideration. The period under consideration is basically the post-exilic period. So the post-exilic period, I mentioned that also in the last episode on Muhammadim. It was the time in history where Judaites, right? So Judaites, it's a little bit complex. One episode, actually, I'll do a little bit of the history of ancient Israel. Ancient Israel consisted of 2 groups, or 2 previous groups of people, kingdoms, various groups of people anyway, within 2, if you want to say geographical location in ancient Israel or ancient Canaan, right? It's Israel in the north and it was Judah in the south. At some point, both kingdoms or both groups or both segments, right, of ancient Israel. So the Israel in the north and Judah and the south people were taken captive into Babylon, right, by the Babylonian Empire. And this is the period of time that this research on the root or the origins of the word SaTaN is referring to. Well, after that time, right? So mainly the people from Judah, they were taken into captivity in ancient Babylon for approximately, say, 70, if I'm correct, years. And after the exile, this is the period of time in history that is considered to be the post-exilic period. So this is around that time that a lot of those texts in the Bible are finalized and put together. So the ideas of some of those texts mature around that time. So this is the time that it's referring to when it says that here that the Arabic cognate that SaTaN, right? Dr. Day, Peggy all day, she doesn't think that that primitive meaning of SaTaN can be inferred from the Arabic SaTaN because there is no attestation to SaTaN during the post-exilic period, right? For us to say emphatically to conclude that, you know what, there is the roots of SaTaN probably stem from the ancient Arabic SaTaN. So what exactly does the word SaTaN mean? So generally it is translated into the English as adversary and rendered into the Greek Septuagint. The Greek Septuagint is the Greek version of the Bible, right? That was written after, again, a post-exilic period. After the dispersion, the Judahites are going to become Jews. And around that time, they no longer necessarily mainly speak Hebrew, right? Ancient Hebrew or classical Hebrew, because they've been dispersed, right? So they developed the Aramaic language or they adopted, I should say, dialect. And they also, obviously, some of them with Alexander the Great taking over the known world and Hellenizing the world. Most people, Greek becomes the lingua franca of the world. So these Judaites that have now become Jews, right? They no longer speak ancient Hebrew, they speak Greek. They write, some of their scholars and scribes do a translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, and that translation is what's called the Septuagint. This is background information for those of y'all who don't know. So the word SaTaN, it is translated into the English as adversary and rendered into the Greek Septuagint as diabolos. Diabolos is the word from which we get the English word devil. One may assume these words to originally carry the notion of evil, which it is commonly associated to, and imagine the character of a bad guy at the mention of the word adversary. Yet, in the case of the Hebrew word or noun, SaTaN, the notion of adversary does not automatically denote moral evil as we understand it in our present time. So when you hear the word SaTaN in Hebrew, it's not necessarily, or which it does, in fact, it has a semantic value that we have in English as adversary, right? That we translate it generally, but it's not adversary as in moral sense. Okay, let's move forward. Additionally, another scholar named Henry A. Kelly, he admonishes Bible readers to resist the urge of viewing the word evil in this mode. Therefore, when the Gospels refer to Satan, with a capital S that is, as the evil one should not presume the appellation as synonymous to a maniacal, sadistic, and wretched entity. That's not necessary. This is what we've been taught, and this is what we traditionally understand when we read. I've moved a little bit from the Hebrew Bible into the New Testament because I want to explain what Dr. Kelly, right, Henry Kelly, is mentioning here. He's saying that when you read the gospel and you see the word Satan, now the word Satan now, it's usually translated as a capital S and lowercase a-t-a-n in English, same thing in French, right? And usually how we understand this is the name of this evil entity. He's saying that the Bible readers of the New Testament, or of the Gospels specifically, they have to withhold and control this urge to understand the word SaTaN as, some moral, to have some moral connotation to it, when even though in the Gospels, this word SaTaN, or the word SaTaN there, is associated with the term the evil one. One should not presume, he said, that this appellation is synonymous to a maniacal or sadistic or wretched entity. Now, this sort of meaning is a misinterpretation of the SaTaN of the New Testament. The challenge in this part is to avoid all forms of anachronism. What we mean by anachronism is some ideas that we have in the modern time. We take them, obviously, we're from the modern world. When we're reading the Bible or any books that we're reading that have origination in antiquity, right? We have to be careful not to impose, right, modern sensitivities upon these texts as we interpret them. That's what is intended by anachronism. So we have to be careful not to do anachronism when we're reading the Gospels in the New Testament, so that we can come to a better comprehension of basically what is being said, or what we're studying, or what we're reading. We should not a priori suppose a single rigid meaning of the word SaTaN, or Satan, when we read it. It is more prudent to follow after Dr. Day, Dr. Day that I mentioned earlier, Peggy Day. She uses James Barr, which is another scholar, another biblical scholar. He has a model which aims to analyze the way that the word SaTaN functions in the Hebrew text, okay, where it appears. Instead of assuming that all these references in the biblical text, every time you see the word SaTaN, instead of assuming that it has one specific meaning, I'm proposing that let us follow the approach that Dr. Peggy Day has taken, because she's written extensively on this idea of this notion of SaTaN. And what she's done in her research on this idea is to use a model from another scholar, James Barr, which he basically proposes that we have to study and investigate the notion of SaTaN or SaTaN, see how this word functions in the Hebrew Bible and the text where they're mentioned, and not presume that when we see it, the meaning that we think that we have in our head is what it's saying. So, what does the Bible actually say about SaTaN? So, I'm going to get into this section. We're going to talk a little bit about the Bible. So get your Bibles or Google a Bible, whichever translation you may have, but be careful, okay? Because as I mentioned, I'm going from the Hebrew, right? From the original language of these texts, and you're going to be reading possibly translations. So there will be some divergent readings, okay? But that's okay. We'll deal with that when it comes. So I once asked a speaker at a church Bible study group, right, to explain to me who or what the SaTaN was. And his answer, here's what his answer was, right? His answer was that the Bible says that SaTaN was created by God as a cherub or cherubim, right? These angels, the most powerful of God's angelic beings, who became the devil as a result of pride. This is what this gentleman told me when I asked him what he believes or what he thought SaTaN is or meant in the Bible, and this is what he told me. Now, truly, there exist no passages, right, where the Bible represents SaTaN as a fallen cherub or as a fallen cherubim. I will return to the origin of this fable later on, in this discussion on SaTaN. Right now, what I'm going to do is demonstrate exactly what the Bible says about SaTaN. So we first encountered the word SaTaN or SaTaN in the Hebrew Bible, the so-called Old Testament, as I mentioned earlier, where it appears 16 times in the Hebrew with a definite article, ha. I mentioned that also last episode. So In English, we have a definite article, the, right? So in Hebrew, you have one, too. It's pronounced as ha. So 16 times in the Hebrew Bible, the word SaTaN appears with that definite article. So it appears as SaTaN 16 times in the Hebrew Bible. And there are about 11, references. My apologies. I had just lost my page, that I took notes on. And so they are, as I mentioned, there are 11 other references of the noun SaTaN that is found in the Bible. Now, these texts either refer to SaTaN as a celestial being or as a terrestrial being. Hence why I will also divide, as I said, this episode into different parts, right? Where we're going to talk mainly about the terrestrials, meaning or reference of the word SaTaN. In light of the common association of the popular view of the figure of Satan with the Bible, one would assume that mention of Satan would be omnipresent in its pages, but it is not so. The word Satan is specifically mentioned with reference or with respect to heavenly entities. And take note if you wish, but I'll have it in the reference. These are Bible books where the word Satan is specifically mentioned with respect to heavenly entities. It's in Numbers 22, verse 22, Zechariah 3, verse 1 to 7, Job 1, verses 6 to 2, and verse 10. First Chronicles 21, verse 1 to 21, verse 1 to 22, and earthly Satans, where the word SaTaN in the Bible is used to reference earthly individuals. It's in 1 Samuel 29, verse 4, 2 Samuel 19, verse 17 to 24, 1 Kings 5, verse 4, 1 Kings 11, 14, verse 14, 23, verse 25, and lastly, and Psalm 109, 1 to 6. These are the instances in the Hebrew Bible where you'll find the word SaTaN is used for terrestrial or earthly entities. So, in keeping with the schema of Dr. Day, right? So she has a book called An Adversary in Heaven. I'll add it to the reference, as I mentioned. Let us analyze the word SaTaN, how it functions in the text where it is associated to human beings. In 1 Samuel 29, verse 4, 1 Samuel chapter 29, verse 4, Dr. Day affirms that the noun SaTaN, what it means there is simply adversary, in the sense that when you read the story, the Philistines were the arch enemies of the ancient Israelites. So the Philistines are reported in this story as being worried that if they allow David, who is going to become king, to join them in an upcoming battle against the then known King Saul, he may become an opponent to them if he should decide to betray them to his native Israelite kinsmen. So because what happens in the story is that David is persecuted by Saul, he leaves the Israelite camp, and he becomes this mercenary, right? This gangster for hire, this hitman, and he's hired by the Philistines, who are actually the arch enemies of his people. Now, in this text in 1 Samuel chapter 29, verse 4, we'll find the word SaTaN is used. It's in the mouth of the Philistines, and they're using it to categorize David, because they're worried that David is going to become a SaTaN for them, right? Why? Because they're afraid that if they allow him to join their ranks, if they hire him, and they go into battle against his people, he might turn against them. So he might become an opponent. Now in 2 Samuel 19 is another reference of the word SaTaN used for referring to terrestrial or human entities. 2 Samuel chapter 19, verses 17 to 24. The word SaTaN, it can seem to be a curse or insult. It is often assumed that there's a character, Abishai, who's there. He was being an instructor of sorts to David. That's what we think when we read 2 Samuel 19, verse 17 to 24. But according to Dr. Day, that is not the case. This misunderstanding, she says, owes its existence to certain Bible translations. For example, in the King James Version, right, the episode in verse 22 reads as such: "And David said, What have I to do with you, ye sons of Zeruiah, that ye should this day be adversaries unto me?" And another version of the Bible, the NET, this is what it reads: "But David said, What do we have in common, you sons of Zeruiah? You are like my enemy today. Should anyone be put to death in Israel today?" Dr. Day proposes an alternate translation for this verse, which suggests that Abishai is not David's, but another guy named Shimei. He's Shimei's accuser, and that Abishai assumes the role of accuser in this specific situation. So the word SaTaN in this particular text, and in this context, it applies. What it implies is a legal accuser. So Abishai is playing a legal accuser to Shimei. And another reference in the Hebrew Bible, okay, where the word SaTaN is referencing a terrestrial or human entity, it's 1 Kings chapter 5. SaTaN means adversary in the sense that there was no military opposition against Solomon, because in this text, it's referencing Solomon, right? And the reason that there was no military opposition to Solomon, it was because Yahweh, or Yehovah, was well disposed towards him. In 1 Kings chapter 11, the human or earthly SaTaNs and the persons of Hadad and Rezon are also legal military adversaries. Scholars understand these texts within the greater framework of the Deuteronomist history, which retells ancient Israel's history in light of its relationship to the Mosaic law, where Israel is rewarded or punished according to its allegiance to Yahweh. Hence, Hadad and Rezon, as SaTaNs or as Satans, are analogous to peace officers or policemen. They're divine policemen that are raised by Yahweh in response to Solomon's idolatry and transgression of the covenant. So to understand, according to Dr. Day, in 1 Kings chapter 11, why is the word Satan used here to refer to these two human characters? One is called Hadad and Rezon. She's saying that they're basically, the word SaTaN here, what it semantically means is that Rezon and Hadad, they're functioning as policemen, divine policemen that are serving as opposition, right, to Solomon. Yahweh has raised them to be oppositions to Solomon because Solomon has went into idolatrous, activities. He's worshiping other deities apart from Yahweh. And the reason that is mentioned the Deuteronomist history is because the Deuteronomist history is very bent on the Mosaic law, right? That Israel, or the people who are going to consist Israel, should worship Yahweh only and no other gods, right? So this is the framework for this mention of the SaTaN in 1 Kings 11, right, when referencing these two characters. So again, you should read those texts so you can get a picture. You'll see those words SaTaN. You might not see it in your Bible. It might appear as adversary, or they might translate it in some other English word. But that word that they use, whether it's adversary or opponent, it's the word SaTaN in Hebrew. And this is basically in chapter 11 of 1 Kings. What Dr. Day, that is explaining here is that Hadad, this character Hadad and Rezon, they're called SaTaNs, and that SaTaN is referring to them in English. So how we should understand it is they're basically divine policemen who are there to become a opposition to Solomon, because Yahweh has summoned them to do so, to be in opposition, to be a Satan or Satans to Solomon because of his sins. The word Satan or SaTaN, and finally in Psalm 109, referencing, a human or earthly entity, it seems, according to Dr. Day, to have a forensic significance to it. Here, she suggests that a formal court hearing is in place, right, in which SaTaN brings charges against the psalmist's antagonists. And that's the plot of the story. If you read the Psalm 109, you'll see it. So what she's saying is it should be understood as basically his court is in session, right? And the SaTaN is bringing charges against the psalmist, the person who is writing this psalm and who is speaking in this psalm, right? And when you read the psalm, you'll see how he's speaking. This person is speaking against people who are against him. So this is the plot of what's happening in Psalm 109. And the word SaTaN is used there. And she says that, Dr. Day, that is, she's saying that it should be understood. The word SaTaN here has a forensic component to it, right? It's basically, she says that the reader should not impose a restricted meaning to this word Satan here either. Like, not, even though, yes, it has a forensic connotation to it. So there is court is in session. SaTaN is basically laying charges against the antagonists of the psalmist. She's saying, however, be careful, okay, not to impose only this meaning to the word, because as she stated, the word or the noun SaTaN in biblical literature it's semantically fluid. Like a lot of word in Hebrew are, okay? And ancient Hebrew, that is. Even so, the definition of the SaTaN in Psalm 109 should not be understood as strictly forensic, she's saying. Although the psalmist seeks to, he's looking for, when you look at what's happening in the Psalm 109, that is, it seems that the psalmist is saying that he's looking for a witness, right? So it's court is in session and he needs a witness to accuse or testify against his opponent. But she's saying that, so this is how the word SaTaN is functioning there. But she's saying there's also a legal undertone to the word SaTaN in Psalm 109. It's basically the legal undertone is as a result of someone breaking the law in that text. Okay, when you read it, have that in mind, right? So in these passages, right, that refer to celestial SaTaNs, what can be concluded is that there is the possibility of this double meaning, okay, of accuser/adversary, and this is to be determined by the function of the word within the greater textual context. So today we're going to stop here, okay? As I mentioned, we're going to delve deeper. We'll get into the New Testament too, and we'll then get into this notion of, so why do we understand Satan as this evil figure, as if what we're seeing thus far, right? These are the first instances in the Hebrew Bible where the word SaTaN, which in English we say Satan, is used. And these first instances, the texts that I've just referred to by way of Dr. Day's research, you've noticed, or you'll notice if you read them yourself, even in English, even if you don't see the word SaTaN, the word that is translated as, and in the English, is for, whether it's adversary or opponent or accuser, it's usually the word SaTaN that is used in these texts. But as you can see, this word SaTaN is used to refer to humans. But the idea or the notion of Satan that generally we have, right, is of this malevolent, evil spirit, right, who rules hell and is somehow metaphysically wreaking havoc on earth. So how do we get from what we've just read, right, to that? As we go along in this study or this notion of Satan, we will figure it out. We'll find out. But for now, sufficient to say this section or this episode, we wanted to deal with the etymology, the roots of the idea or the word SaTaN in the Hebrew Bible. And we wanted to talk about the first instances in the Hebrew Bible's literature where this word is used. And guess what? Where the first instances where it's used is to refer to earthly or terrestrial or human beings. And those human beings, they're not possessed. It's basically being used semantically as they are basically accusers or opponents um, um, of another. So, and modern, popular culture, hip hop, we would say that the semantically, obviously, like we say, as Dr. Day says, we shouldn't restrict the word to just this, because we have to see how it's functioning, right, within the greater context of the text that it's used. But generally, right, you can say the idea that's conveyed, and the word SaTaN is, and as I've mentioned it in the popular culture today, right, is op. Every time you see the word SaTaN, that, and at least in the instances that we've just read, referring to human entity, is basically this entity is an op, or these entities are an op or opposition or opponent to another. So this is this episode, right, on the history of SaTaN versus Satan. So HaSatan in Hebrew, lowercase, versus Satan with a capital S in English. We're trying to understand the roots and development. How did we go from HaSatan to Satan? I'll stop here. I am your host, Gandhi the Zoe. Again, I thank you for attending and viewing and listening to this episode. Trust that you'll come back and invite another. Subscribe, like, comment, even dislike, engage with us, and show us some support. Give us some force, some positive energy, and we'll see you on the second episode of this series on the word or concept of SaTaN or Satan. Peace.